Hello, it's Daryl here with a Total Soccer Show preamble. Should let you know, today's show, there is no Taylor Rockwell, but don't worry, he'll be back later this week. For today's show, I was down in Florida, as I mentioned earlier. While I was here, wanted to make sure to meet up with George Quraishi of Howler magazine. If you're a long-time listener, you'll know George is a friend of the show. George, we collaborate with George on the Goalmouth podcast every morning, 7 a.m, all the soccer news in a bite-sized form. I sat down with George and we talked about all kinds of things, but mostly we talked about how he puts Howler magazine together. We talked about how to pitch. If you want to be a soccer writer, we talked about how to pitch an editor. Some great tips for do's and don'ts in this episode. We also, because it's a big feature in the new Howler magazine, we talked pro-rel. So if you want to hear about pro-rel, there's plenty of that in this episode. George was a gracious host, sort of gave me some rides around Tampa, showed me around the town, he even let me play on his soccer team at Cinco. Unfortunately, we did not win. I think maybe one of the goals was a little bit my fault. We lost 4-1, but I met some good people, had a good time. Before we get on to the show, I want to let you know that today's show is sponsored by SeatGeek. SeatGeek has taken the pain out of the ticket buying process. SeatGeek does all the price comparison for you by searching multiple ticket sites and ensuring that you get the best possible deal. It does all the work to save you time and money. You may remember a couple episodes ago, I mentioned that through SeatGeek, I was considering going to see Van Morrison while I was down here in Florida. I didn't go in the end. Two of the people on the soccer team I played on tonight at Cinco went to see it, said it was incredible. Even though Van Morrison's, 71, said his voice was absolutely beautiful still. I know that the show was sold out, but there were still tickets available via the SeatGeek app. So I think the moral of the story is don't miss out. And if you want to book some tickets via SeatGeek, you can get $20 off. Here's what you need to do. You download the SeatGeek app. You go to the settings tab and click add a promo code. Enter the promo code TSS and then SeatGeek will send you $20 after you make your first ticket purchase. So download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code TSS today. Okay, I don't want to take up any more of your time with the preamble. We're veering into Mark Maron territory here. Here's today's Total Soccer Show.
Hello
and welcome to the Total Soccer Show.
It's dummy, man.
It's Total Soccer Show.
You're such a dummy.
I'm visiting. I've got the big mic. So it's Daryl Grove hosting the Total Soccer Show / dummy with not Taylor Rockwell but George Quraishi. Hello.
Hey Taylor. Man. Okay. Well,
that happens a lot.
I'm living out a fantasy right now, so you're gonna have to forgive me.
So here's what's going on here. I'm down in Florida with my wife, but George and I have been working together on the Goalmouth since I want to say October.
It's really I thought it was
feels longer, right?
It feels like last week we just started. It's.
And we've also, we've been in touch for a couple of years or so. I'm a big admirer of Howler. We've talked before about how I love independent soccer media, and Howler's a great example of that. So I wanted to talk to you while I was down here, and I wasn't quite sure what we were going to talk about. But then the timing worked out, because what were you just doing when I walked into Howler HQ?
Turns out today we were shipping the magazine to the printer for the issue 12. And so
this interview has been delayed by an hour or so because copy edits and photo credits are coming
of different kinds. Yeah, so I'm on Slack. I'm checking it every now and then, just glancing there to make sure my our creative director is not freaking out about anything. So
if for people who are not on the Howler Slack channel, which I guess is just the people that work for Howler,
it's not that many people who aren't on the Slack channel.
It feels like most of soccer Twitter is on there. It's like a private soccer Twitter,
for better or worse.
So the idea I had today, George, was to basically, instead of talking about general things, I want to talk about how you put together an issue of Howler, and maybe ask you some questions about how and why you make certain decisions. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's really flattering that you care that much to ask me, so thank you.
I genuinely think listeners would be interested. And I'm also thinking of listeners who might, there are a lot of people who are aspiring soccer writers, and they might want to make some pitches. Like, I want to ask about sort of how you decide what's a good pitch, what's a bad pitch, what goes in the special folder with the trash can on it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you shouldn't. No misspellings. That's the first one.
Right? Yeah.
I think it would shock people how many pitches you get. And it's like, I'm a writer and I can't write.
Or the other one is, I've always admired your publication, and then they put a different publication.
Other name, yeah.
So they've definitely been sending out a form letter.
You got to learn how to copy and paste better. Yeah.
All right, so before we keep ragging on aspiring soccer writers,
I'm sorry.
which I guess is not what we want to be doing. Tell me, I'm assuming this is the winter 2017 issue you were about to put to bed.
So this was an item of discussion this morning. Is it winter 2017 or is it spring 2017? And it's spring 2017 because it's going to hit newsstands early February.
Okay.
And what happens is...
I'm going to say you're biased because you live in Florida, and I'm looking out the window, and it's sunny right now.
It is in the 80s, I think, today. Yeah.
People in Buffalo, New York would disagree with you.
But the main reason is you just don't want people people who monitor the newsstands and like decide when to throw magazines away. You don't want them throwing it away early.
It's a business decision.
Yeah, completely.
See, this is the gold insight I was looking to get on today's show. I'm only half joking. That is really a fascinating idea. Is this why when I look at magazine stands and it's, say, July... It's early July.
Right.
I see like
August
a copy
already,
of, I can see Vogue or whatever. It's the August issue of Vogue.
That's exactly what it is.
And everyone knows the September Vogue is the one to get.
Right. And there's a movie about it.
Yeah. So the September issue. Right?
My wife was an intern at Vogue while they were filming that.
Is she in the movie?
I don't think she's in the movie, but it's a little piece of trivia that you won't find on IMDb.
So I guess, how do we want to start this? Maybe let's talk about how you decided what's in the issue. You gave me a sneak peek at the table of contents in as a PDF, and I saw the big two stories that stood out were, I think it was called Masters of the Dark Arts, it was about tough guy midfielders, and Pro Rel Manifesto, which I think is exactly what it sounds like. Is it fair to say those are the two big features? Am I missing anything?
Yeah.
I read the TOC quickly.
I would call the Masters of the Dark Arts is an element of a package that we have about... It's a few things, right? It's actually called Dirty Work is the package.
Dirty Work.
And the idea is that we wanted to highlight, we spend so much time talking about the beautiful players, the creators, the strikers and the midfielders. We wanted to talk about the guys who don't get the kind of credit they deserve, who do the stuff, nobody else wants to do, who go overlooked. And, I think that's changing actually. Like, nobody's going to say Sergio Busquets is overlooked these days, but what he does...
But he's the most overlooked of, say, when it was Busquets, Iniesta, Xavi, he was the last person you talk about.
And we found this quote from Del Bosque saying that if you watch the game, you don't see Busquets, and if you watch Busquets, you see the game. Whoa. And it was such a great, and it's, to me, that sort of encapsulates what we're trying to get at. But this package it's got two sort of different ideas. One is the great defensive midfielders who deserve that kind of praise, and the other one is the actual hard men. And so we have
the Vinnie Jones types,
the Vinnie Jones, and the thesis of this essay, which is written by a guy named Kevin Alexander, is that there was a golden age of the hard man, and he and she have been squeezed out a little bit of the modern game.
Right.
And he actually posits...
the US women's national team is kind of a great example how we keep having say Lauren Holiday playing essentially defensive central midfielder, and she's a striker.
Yeah.
Right? Because there aren't many of those like tough players around.
Who we included from the women's national team is Shannon Box. And
she was on the 2015 roster, but she's one of the older players, right? Just because I guess there was no one else to do that job.
She's quite a bit older. She's had some incredible ailments to her body. And a few other that just make her story so incredible. But it's that kind of player who just keeps going. You don't even notice if things are going well. You don't even notice that they're there. And their teammates are probably the ones who appreciate them the most because they know how much they're covering for them. Exactly.
So you said Kevin Alexander? Did Kevin Alexander pitch this, or how did this come about? This is the stuff I'm interested in. The process of how you decide on this.
Yeah. So no, I went to him. He pitched me a story, and this is, I think, if you talk to editors, you'll find that there's this, they have an ecosystem of writers they work with. Some pitches come to them, and those are, I get a lot of pitches out of the blue, which I always appreciate when people think of Howler. And then some ideas I have, and with those, I'll go to a writer that I think is right for the story and can pull it off. And Kevin had pitched me a story that came out in issue 10 about chants and songs and singing in stadiums. And I thought, that was a fun sort of survey of the history of singing in stadiums. And I thought, if anyone can take this thesis that I have, that the hard man has been squeezed out, but and do it justice, but also swing it forward a little bit beyond where I sort of brought it with my own one-line email to him.
So like fresh eyes, new ideas.
It was him, and he actually did. He posits that there are still hard men on the pitch. They just don't play in that position, in this central midfield role. And he basically posits that they're strikers now. Diego
Costa.
Diego Costa is a great example. Jamie Vardy in a little bit. Like guys who can take care of themselves and have realized that the game is rigged a little bit to protect guys in those positions.
That's, and they can elbow a centre back and get away with
anything. So anyway, I really enjoyed his essay when it came back, and it was exactly what I was hoping for. It took this idea, it fits the package, and it's sort of the anchor of this package. And the third element, the second one, is Masters of the Dark Arts, which is just sort of a photo essay of some of the greats through time with deep captions, what we call deep captions about each of them, sort of giving
like a mini story almost.
Encapsulating their career. We have Obdulio Varela, Valery Voronin from the USSR, all the way up to, Busquets, Makelele, Vieira, Keane. The third pillar of this package is a piece by Matt Doyle about U.S. defensive midfielders. Doyle on the top, U.S. defensive midfielders from Mike Sorber in '94, who Bora Milutinovic said was the most important player on that team, through Michael Bradley right now, and looking at the fortunes of the national team actually tend to swing with whether or not the coach decides to play with, and he shows...
Naming no names of recent U.S. national team coaches.
But also 98. Like, if you look at 98, and Matt dug up this Opta graphic showing passing patterns, there was no defensive midfielder on that 98 team that lost to Iran. There were three players, I think it was Joe Max Moore, Tab Ramos, and Claudio Reyna, maybe, playing basically like three across, and there was no one sort of providing a little bit of depth and cover for them. And I didn't know this. I've obviously watched that tournament, the lore of the 98 team and what a disaster it was. But Matt going into that...
That's why Matt Doyle is gold.
Yeah, it was really illuminating. So that's that package. And so when I say a package, what that is it's more than just a story or a feature. It's like...
You build out from it, right?
Yeah, it's like something long, something short, a bunch of short little elements. Like... The thing that makes reading a magazine a pleasure, which is all those different things on a page that sort of drag your eye here and there. That's what that is.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about then, so you kind of had this idea yourself, right? Then I get the idea of being like, oh, Kevin Alexander's got this skill set. He could bring something to it. I could kind of collaborate with him. He'll write it. I'll edit it. Because, you are Howler magazine in many ways, right? It all goes through George.
It is still too much an extension just of me,
Yeah, so that's what I was thinking. Like, was it tempting to write it yourself? Or is there just a recognition that there's no way I could write a really in-depth feature story and put the rest of the magazine together?
Well, first of all...
Because I think you're a multitasker. I've seen we've done a screen share when we were setting up Goalmouth. You had more tabs open in Safari than I've ever seen. Whoever invented Safari, if they saw that many tabs open, they would be amazed that it could hold that many.
Yeah, I'm so bad that I actually have to use Safari sparingly for certain things when Chrome is overloaded. That's how bad I am. So, no, I think that, well, two things. One is, yes, I couldn't write every piece that I would like to and still put the magazine together. The second thing is that my best writers are better writers than I am. And so I would rather assign some of these stories to people who I think can really take it and do a better job. And I'm
you the defensive midfielder of Howler?
Maybe. I'm again, too many things for Howler. It's about sort of, I don't know, temperamentally, I think I'm more of an editor. I enjoy the social aspect of it and working with other people to put this together.
Is there a pleasure in, I've done a bit of editing. The pleasure for me is in sort of smoothing something out and making it better. It feels like I'm terrible at I couldn't I couldn't fix a sink or do any plumbing or anything like that. Yeah. But I feel like I can make an article better by smoothing it out, right? It's the closest I've got to being a real man in terms of doing that.
I just fixed my toilet, so I'm feeling pretty good about myself.
Good job. I just used it. It flushed.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, no, I try to provide the best experience. There are two kinds of editing. The way I see it, this is a really simplistic view, but there's taking something that's bad and making it acceptable. And there's taking something that's great and making it even better. Right. And you try to get so real talk for me, like the way that Howler works. Like if this were, I've worked at magazines before that had unlimited budgets, portfolio, Condé Nast portfolio, which, had a crazy launch.
Yeah. It's pitched at rich people, right?
Yeah. They had so much money. You were paying great writers to do great stories. And in the ecosystem that Howler, where Howler exists, we don't pay very well at all. We pay, but we don't pay well. And so I get a lot of pitches from new writers, young writers who are less experienced, who need more coaching, need more guidance. And so their stuff tends to come in rougher. And I understand that's part of the bargain. And part of what I enjoy doing about it is like that aspect of mentorship and trying to help create more voices in American soccer media.
Because then you send them back out into the world and with a strengthened ecosystem.
Yeah, right? And I wouldn't take credit for that, but it's in a small way. Like I'm hopefully trying to bring some standards that I learned at other places into what is a pretty amateurish. Not, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but it's filled with amateurs writing about soccer in a lot of cases, right, on blogs and whatnot, and trying to bring a little bit of a style guide, right? Like, how do we punctuate this? How do we joke about this on the goal mouth? Like, should it be United are or United is? And I have
it depends which country you're in, right?
Well, it doesn't, because a lot of Americans say United are, and
I see,
grates on me, right?
I'm trying to give me and Ryan Bailey a pass because we get kind of
because Brooks does it, and I'm always like, Brooks, what are you doing?
Yeah, he has no excuse. Brooks has no excuse. I want that on the record.
He does have a reason for doing it, and he says, by insisting on the American construction, you may be closing yourself off to a really wide audience that will disregard you just based on that.
Okay.
Or like saying, calling it soccer.
That's a fair point. Yeah.
It is. It's a point of view. And I take the opposite point of view, which is that's sort of the point, which is
like to build something American,
which is to be self-consciously American about this, and not to apologize for that. So he has a totally valid viewpoint, but I think mine is as well. And that's how we do it.
But one of you's in charge.
Well, no, but he's in charge of
course,
the website, and so we have on the website it's a lot less uniform. He does it the way he wants to, and
I would say that makes sense as well, because obviously it's harder to ship Howler over to people in the UK, especially if it's got Howler has a North American bent, right?
Yeah.
So but then the website is more global. So I could see how that argument works in Brooks's favor for the website, and your argument works in your favor for the magazine. So going back to pitches.
Yes.
I think we've already kind of in the intro jokingly but seriously covered the things that get your pitch in the trash can, right?
Right.
What's a good pitch? When you get something come in, it's someone you've never heard of, right? Say it's not someone you're familiar with. What's a thing in that pitch that makes you think, either I'm going to approve this pitch and we're going to publish it, or I'm going to keep this person in memory and they might be a person I go to when I have an idea that I think they would be.
Right.
Telltale signs of a good pitch.
Yeah. A good pitch sort of starts to tell the story to me. Right? Because I'm the first audience in a sense, and so if you can get me hooked and wanting more, and that doesn't mean like leaving me with a cliffhanger. It means telling me that not only that it's a good story, but that you can execute that story.
Yeah.
And so if you were to leave me with a cliffhanger, I would just be pissed off. I want to see that there's an arc to the story, that how it's going to finish, that there is like some stakes, something at stake, and a payoff, whether that's like an emotional payoff or some sort of information that we didn't have before.
Right. So a story is like a story, like a narrative story.
Exactly like that.
Like a Robert McKee story.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about crime fiction the other day, and I'm a huge I read so much crime fiction, and one of the reasons I like it so much is that it's so plot driven. I mean, I love stuff that has great characters and character development. I love a good plot. I need it to move, and this is an argument that I have. It's a point of view that I have about most types of writing, especially stuff that goes in Howler. And if it's a narrative, it needs to be a narrative. It needs to have a plot. It needs to have, even if it's, it's not fiction usually, but it needs to go somewhere. It needs to take me somewhere. And so I need to see in a pitch that there's a story, that you can tell the story, that there's something real at stake, that you can pull off what you're saying you're going to pull off. Like, occasionally you'll get like, hey, I'd like to interview Robert Lewandowski. And I'm like, yeah, that's me too. You know what I mean? Howler can't get you access to do that.
Right. And that also betrays a misunderstanding of the ecosystem of the media.
It does. As well. Yeah. Which is fine. Like, I think, young writers sometimes do that. That's great. Yeah. You should want to do the big stories.
I'll tell you the thing that happened to me. I went to school in Ireland, right? And my university dorms were right next to the UCD team, right? Which is like a university team that's playing the top division in Ireland. Mm-hmm.
I went to a Bows game when I was in Dublin.
All right. Bohemians? Yeah. So I pitched 442 UK, and I offered, this is me, young Daryl, right? I said, hey, I could write an Irish football column for you. And the response I got back from the editor was harsh, but essentially it was, we already have someone doing that. Maybe you should have read through the magazine and checked if that was there.
That is another thing.
Yeah. I took that to heart. That made me think, I should research the magazines before I just make random pitches to the first soccer magazine I think of.
And it's not just to know if they've covered the thing before, but to know if your pitch, in terms of voice and sensibility and point of view, fit with the overall aesthetic of the magazine. And that's important. That's really important.
What can you do for them, right?
Right. Well, yeah. But I would say like that is an interesting, like if I were you, my advice to you would have been, okay, you want to write a column about Irish football, which implies like an ongoing thing. And I don't know who you are. I've never seen you. I don't know what your writing's like. I don't want to commit to publishing a story a week by you for the next, right?
Because the budget then is multiplied by month.
Well, it's not just the budget, but it's that my time that's budgeted to editing you, and how much work am I going to have to put in to make your stuff readable?
Yeah.
I don't know. But what I would have said to you is, you're in Ireland, you're in an interesting place that's undercovered. And so find a story, like an actual story that only you can do because you found it and it's local, and it doesn't need to be a huge story. It can be a small story in terms of the, the notoriety of the person you're writing about or whatever. But I want writers who are going to write about the places where they are. Mm-hmm. And so often I'll get something like,
hey, where were you when I needed you? I could have done with all this advice.
but I get so many pitches that are like, I'd like to write about, why Leicester City is failing this year, which is like fine and interesting.
They sold N'Golo Kante.
But like, you live in Georgia. And so like, could you not find a story that's interesting in Georgia? Because then you can go and actually get scenes and quotes and dialogue and like put me in a place where no one else is.
If I'd say the pitch you want then is something that no one else could provide you.
Well, it's not that no one else could provide it, but like, it's something that you can do.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not just like your thoughts, right? I don't want like your exposition on this team 800 miles away. Sorry, I'm thinking like Taylor, 3,000 miles away.
You maybe get to Greenland 800 miles.
I want the story that's local because with any, like the best stories in Howler have a sense of place and character, and you don't get that if you don't talk to people and actually report the story.
Speaking of local, we got to talk about the other big story.
Okay.
In the spring 2017 issue of Howler.
See, I purposely left Echo out of her crate for this so that you could get a sense of what it's like to work from my kitchen table.
Echo, the most popular dog in Tampa.
Yeah, among a certain subset of neighbors. Let me go grab her.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to leave that in, and we'll just pick up?
Yeah, let's leave it in. For anybody who couldn't see what I was just doing, I just grabbed a puppy and brought this puppy back into the dining room. Echo, hey, here's a treat. Come here. Oh, she doesn't want my treat. She doesn't want it. All right, let's try.
So the other big story, Pro Rel Manifesto.
The Pro Rel Manifesto,
by Peter Wilt wrote it, I think I saw.
Wilt,
So people who don't know Peter Wilt, did he found Chicago Fire? Or he's one of the people involved in setting it up?
He was the first GM of the Chicago Fire.
And he helped found Indy 11. He's kind of a legendary guy.
Indy 11. He's quite a few teams. The Chicago, it wasn't the NWSL then, it was...
Sting?
No. It was the women's team.
Red Stars?
The Chicago Red Stars, I believe it was.
Yeah. But he has previous in...
Back during WPS. He's launched a bunch of teams, and the interesting thing about him is that he's done it at a bunch of different levels. So MLS, a women's league, NASL. He's
maybe launching a Chicago
He's trying to launch a Chicago NASL team.
Yeah.
He's just active in this, and he has a reputation for really helping to create vibrant fan cultures and communities around his teams, which I think is something that really can be an afterthought sometimes.
So that makes him the perfect guy to write about Pro Rel, right?
He's got a lot of experience at different levels, right? Yeah. He definitely has an agenda. He, as someone who's trying to bring an NASL team to fruition and helps, he was very involved in saving the league. He has an agenda here, which I think is fine. I mean, my point of view is that no one's unbiased. Just make your biases known at the beginning, and then people can take what you say with with that knowledge.
So, which way around did this go? Did he say to you, "Hey, I want to write about Pro Rel," or did you say to him, "Hey, Peter, you should write"?
No,
about Pro Rel?
he pitched it. He was writing this piece, and he had already written a piece that we published on the website about. Sort of an analysis.
In Nebraska?
Yeah, well, the headline had Omaha in it, right? Because he did an analysis of different cities around the country and in Canada that would be ripe for a new American pro soccer team.
Right.
And he looked at like demographics, population, corporate, community, competitive sports leagues in the market, all those things. And he sort of did a very detailed analysis of this. And Omaha, turns out, would be a good place for a team to launch.
Weird, right? You'd never guess that.
You never guess it, but like
Cincinnati
surprised me with its crowds, and Sacramento. I mean, there are, we live in a very big country. I've come to now think of the U.S. not as like equivalent to one country in Europe, but sort of as like the equivalent of Europe in terms of its size. And if everyone were interested in soccer, like you could have as vibrant this is a long shot, but like you could have so many leagues around this country just based on the geography and the population. So I don't know. I mean, China's beating us to it right now.
So sorry, which way around was it? How did the story come about? He pitched it, or
he was writing it already.
Oh, I see.
And he said, "Hey, would Howler would you like to publish this in Howler?"
And it's big, right? I think you said 8,000 words.
8,000 words, which is
wow.
We published in 11. Like in the last issue, we had the Florentino Perez profile that was 11,000, but this is up there.
So what? Can you give me an idea of what that story is about? Like how much? What does it cover? Like, because there's so many angles to it, I can't even imagine where to start.
It came in 3 parts. He took every stakeholder in the broad stakeholders in American soccer, and the first part was looking at why each of these might have a reason to not want pro-rel in the United States.
So why it's not happening?
Yeah,
which is something that is of interest to a lot of people.
Not why it's not happening, because that's a different issue.
Right?
Why could it be bad if it were to happen?
I see.
For each of these. So it starts with MLS owners who have the most to lose from instituting pro-rel. Looks at lower league owners who have a lot to gain. Looks at MLS fans, lower league fans. Looks at the broadcast partners, the sponsors, the federations, the U.S. and Canadian federations, the players. So breaks down for each of these groups why they might not want pro-rel to be instituted. Then it takes the opposite look. It looks at what the arguments might be in favor of it for each of these groups. So even for MLS owners, how could this possibly benefit an MLS owner to start playing in a system that has pro-rel? Okay. And then the third part,
so balanced, right?
Balanced, and we actually during the edit we actually merged those two so that instead of going negative, and then positive, we put each one together under the same group heading. So you're going to read about MLS owners, pro and negative, right? Yeah. And then the third part is how could it happen? And he basically comes up with 4 different approaches.
Oh, like a roadmap to pro-rel. Oh, that's what's called the pro-rel manifesto.
From like the most basic, least likely, and most damaging, potentially damaging, which is basically that U.S. Soccer and the Canadian Federation would just say, we are no longer sanctioning leagues that don't have pro-rel. Yeah. Which A, is never going to happen. B, would really be not fair, I think, to the people who have invested so much money in MLS. Of course. I think Peter agrees with that. And all the way to the and there are different sort of shades of this that are 2 and 3. And then number 4 is sort of like his most idealistic version that includes MLS at the top, if you could convince the owners that it's in their favor, and how that could look. And meaningful reforms that could help that. So for instance, mandating supporters trusts, to get fans more involved in not only wanting their team to succeed, but also in managing the team and running it. How would parachute payments work? All of these things that the nitty gritty that has to be worked out if this wants to be realistic. And what I like about what Peter did is he's sort of taken some of the blood out of this conversation, which is so poisonous on Twitter.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it absolutely is. It makes it so that I feel like people are less likely to talk about it because people are maybe scared of any sort of backlash that might come their way.
Yeah, and also I think the idea itself has lost credibility because a lot of the people who push it and the ways they do it are not credible.
Right.
So
were you thinking this is a deliberate attempt to like do it so comprehensively and with someone who has such a respected voice? And I want to say both sides of the argument. Was that part of the thinking for doing it that way?
Peter is a person that I trust to do it well. Mm-hmm. I don't think that I think it would be very naive and not true to say that I think that MLS owners are going to read this and say, yes, this like I completely sign on with every. I'm sure that there will be people on that side of the argument who will raise arguments that Peter I think he did a pretty good job of considering from their point of view, but I think maybe they'll say, you need to weight this argument more than you did in the piece, which is fair. Mm-hmm. But it's like I said, it's got a point of view. And so, if I wanted someone who was completely neutral to write it, I think we could have found that. I think Peter, when I say he took the blood out of the argument, that could be a dangerous thing for an 8,000 word story as well, couldn't it? Because then you're like, oh man, I'm going to fall asleep here.
Well, some of the blood, maybe.
Yeah. And so I think we left enough in there so that it's interesting. It's got a sharp edge where people are going to agree or disagree about things in this, but I also really do think it might help people open their minds. And if not, convince them that one way or the other that they didn't already think about was the right way. They'll at least, I don't know. I think they'll consider it with a new set of eyes, which is maybe the most we can hope for a topic this entrenched and this divisive.
So obviously you worked closely with this story as you do with all the Howler stories. What's the one thing you learned, like that you didn't know about how pro-rel may impact US soccer? What's the one thing you learned from this story?
I'll say this. I think that over time, in the last few years, as I've been doing this from a job, right, thinking about all this stuff, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the ways that leagues are competitive within each other and also competitive with each other. And so the
recent D2 sanctioning being a good example.
That's a great one. But also, like, La Liga, we think of La Liga as having, a couple of teams at the top and then everyone else. And what is the relative strength of that as a product versus, say, England, where none of the teams in England are as good as the top 2-3 teams in La Liga.
Yeah.
But because it's a more competitive league as a whole, is a really compelling product overseas on TV, all these things. So do you follow what I'm saying? It's a really complicated thing. And it's sort of an argument about, like, decentralized planning versus, like, one central, like, brain that's controlling all this stuff. And I think China is an interesting example of this, because, like, I feel like
it's very centralized.
Well, I think it has the capacity to be more centralized, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about MLS, there's the mantra is slow, steady growth, parity. Yeah. And I spoke with Don Garber at MLS Cup, and I said, hey, look, if every team has a chance to win the championship, that means that there's no terrible team in the league. Yeah. If there's no
Chicago Fire fans might disagree.
If there's no but if there's no terrible team in the league, then there can't be a great team.
Right.
That was what I said. And we actually made a table. I mean, I'm sure we're not the first to have done this, but we made a table showing the MLS on top, and then USL, and then NASL at the bottom, and what teams would have been promoted and relegated. It was kind of fun to look at. I mean, obviously that's a little different now that we have 2 Division 2s, and it's not a straight pyramid.
Yeah.
But what we found just by looking at that, and the teams played different numbers of games, right? And so it didn't really help us to look at the number of points they got. So what we did instead was percentage of possible points won. From that season. So I think MLS, there were 102 points up for grabs. I think in the NASL, there was 96, and then it was like 90 maybe in USL. I probably have those numbers wrong.
But statistically similar enough to be able to come up with a percentage.
Right. And what we found was that in MLS, the top teams and the bottom teams were closer to the mean. In the NASL, they were a little farther from the center. And then in the USL, they were much farther from the center.
That's interesting.
As you got progressively farther from the top league, where parity is the goal, you had teams that were much better and much worse. And to me, that was an interesting.
And you prefer that way of you prefer a league to operate that way in terms of entertainment?
I'm not saying that I do. I think you can make. There's a very strong case to be made for parity, and I think MLS makes that case. But I also think that, like, when you think about MLS as a product and like the way it's viewed overseas and the way we view it, I don't think that MLS will be taken quite as seriously. And whether that matters or not is another conversation.
Right.
But until there's a team
it might matter.
capable of beating winning the CONCACAF Champions League. And right now, just based on what we know about how success correlates to payroll, things like that, we're not close. Right, we're not even close to being as good as a great Mexican team.
I boldly predicted an FC Dallas New York Red Bulls CONCACAF Champions League final. I was full of optimism for the start of 2017.
Extremely optimistic, right?
I knew. Yeah, I knew. My tongue would have been in my cheek if it was possible to talk in a microphone that way.
Yes, right. And so so what I think is interesting is that you could actually see a business case for creating not creating, because that's the wrong way to put it, for putting the circumstances in place.
Encouraging?
Like basically fertilizing the league such that the LA Galaxy, when they were unbeatable a few years ago, actually could continue that.
Like the Beckham, Donovan, King,
right. And instead of putting mechanisms in place to, like, bring them back toward the center, you would encourage them to actually continue that trajectory and give them financial reasons to do so, not just because we're going to win the league every year, right? And I think that's what the playoffs do.
So George, we got to start wrapping up because I've got somewhere to be, and you're my ride.
Yes, I am.
So before we get in the car, obviously for Total Soccer Show listeners, I know this is also going to publish on Dummy. So I want to tell Dummy listeners, if you want to subscribe to the Total Soccer Show, you can find us in iTunes.
You should.
You tell Total Soccer Show listeners, where could they find, or how do they get hold of an issue of Howler with the pro-rel story in it and the hard man midfielder?
Yeah, you go to shop.howlermagazine.com. We're actually going to be releasing the cover in the next day or two.
Oh, what's on it? I didn't even ask. What's on it? I nearly failed in my interview technique.
It's really interesting. It's a player. It's Roy Keane.
It's Roy Keane.
It's Roy Keane.
What's he doing?
He is slide tackling your face. His studs are up, and they're coming out of the cover. Yeah, it's
I can't believe I didn't ask you to show me that. I will
show it to you. Right. But we haven't released this yet, but it will be, and I'm very excited about it. And I was going to tell people, subscribe to Total Soccer Show. And I think one thing people don't know is that even like if you're a loyal listener, but you can't listen to every episode, which sometimes I can't because you guys are daily.
Yeah.
I have you on automatic download. Right? Which, first of all, it's there for me to listen to whenever I want to. But also, even if I can't get to it, it actually helps you guys because it gives you another download.
I didn't know you did that.
I do that. I do that for all the podcasts that I love.
For that. Thank you, George.
But I do that for all the podcasts that I love because I know about the economics, and you guys actually sell ads, unlike us, really. We had ads a little while ago, but you guys really make some money from that. And I think that, one download more, even if I can't get to that show that day.
Yeah.
I'm hoping it helps in some small way. So I want to tell everyone who's listening, hey, if you haven't thought about that, it's a great way to help your podcast out, even if you can't get to every episode. Just put it on automatic download, and then just swipe it if you can't get to it, and just swipe it and delete it. But then maybe I shouldn't be revealing these secrets.
I didn't know people did this. I think that's a great thing to do. It's genuine, right? If someone's listening to say like 3 out of 5 episodes, that's still a listener, right?
Totally. Yeah. And it's like the Spotify guys who put their, I've heard of small bands on Spotify who basically ask all their friends and family to like put their album on repeat overnight. It's not quite that bad, right?
So is there a way to do that for Howler? Like, should we take 100 subscriptions to Howler magazine?
Yeah, you go to your dentist's office, every dentist office in your town, and say you need to subscribe to Howler. Same thing with the libraries.
And just so if people don't know about how the industry is, like if people subscribe right now, would they get the spring 2017 issue?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So there you go, people. Go to
shop.howlermagazine.com or whatahowler.com if you want to just read our stories. But hopefully you'll do both.
All right, George Quraishi, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Daryl, thanks so much. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks, listeners. We'll talk to you very soon.